pew, 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 pew. It's the 4th of July-ish. It's July. That's all that matters.
Your pew, pew, pew is fireworks.
Yeah. This time it's fireworks, not America's love of guns.
Or Star Wars reference.
Yes, that's true.
I think the in the Lego movie, because Lego is a pacifistic Danish company, and so I think the entire like shooting references were always very pew 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 kind of like stylized and stuff. They didn't really have guns. There was everything else was shooting, but not really guns. Which whenever you say pew pew pew, I'm always thinking of the Lego movie. Anyway, I'm a parent, as you can tell.
Yeah. I think I've seen 2 Lego movies.
Yeah. Well, the first one was really great. The first one kind of sort of came completely out of nowhere and was like this amazing storyline. And then they made a Batman movie because Batman was kind of a cool character in the first one.
Yeah.
And so they thought they would be good standalone, but then it turned into a DC fail, like all the other DC ones.
It turned like every other DC movie ever made.
I know. I don't know. It just wasn't that great.
In recent memory.
And then Lego Movie 2 was okay, and I don't know if it didn't quite gel because my kids were older at that point, so I didn't really get into it, but it just didn't have the same oomph to it as the first one.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think I was just like, all right, whatever. I don't need it. I've become like I don't watch a lot anymore. It's kind of weird. And it's hard to during the summer. Like, it's hard to justify sitting in front of a TV in the evening when it's like, it's finally cool outside.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Now I can go outside and not be like, I'm going to watch 9 episodes of whatever.
Yeah.
I was going to say Dawson's Creek. That was the first thing that popped in my head. I've never seen an episode of Dawson's Creek. Can't tell you anything about it. But for some reason, that's the show that popped into my head.
Ooh, Dawson's Creek. Well, I mean, here's the thing that works for us lately, and that is getting into shows that have dozens of episodes, especially ones that are sort of a few years old, right? So then there are seasons, episodes. And then so every evening you can just kind of like put on a couple episodes, and it doesn't really matter if you miss half of it, right? It's just sort of background noise, but that's been working for us pretty well.
But this isn't an episode about TV shows.
Why not?
So you got back. Oh. You escaped the heat.
Yeah, I guess we can't really avoid talking.
We can go with weather. We don't want to.
Do we not want to? We always want to, but we know we shouldn't. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
So it was insanely hot in Western Washington, in the world, in the Pacific Northwest over the weekend that everybody experienced. And we had, without knowing this, planned a trip to Portland to see my sister-in-law and her husband. And we kind of wanted to have a casual day in Portland. And so we were already sort of in this travel mode. And then a few days prior, she calls us and says, so it's going to be insanely hot. And, I hadn't even really paid attention because it kind of came out of nowhere, came so sudden, and,
Mm-hmm.
And so we were like, oh, shit, this is going to be insanely hot. And then she says, well, so my in-laws have a cabin at the coast in Oregon by Tillamook. And I'm like, we're going. And so we, instead of going to Portland and melting in Portland, we decided to go to the coast. And we had the absolute most glorious time. So apologies for everyone who melted in Olympia, but we weren't here. We didn't get to experience it.
Yeah, it was fun to watch from afar. I mean, it was 90 here, like in the 90s here, and that's warm enough. No one's thrilled about mid 90s. But comparatively, it was like, oh, cool. So I think the funniest thing, and maybe funny isn't the right word for the amusing thing for me was to see people still trying to go out and run when it was like 110 degrees outside.
Yeah.
Like, how... Why? Like just take that taper time or run in the middle of the night. Like, don't go out and put yourself at risk. Come on, it's not that important.
I'm fascinated by this, right? Because I think that there are 2 ways of dealing with heat. One of them is the I call it the Mediterranean way. I suppose you can call it closer to the equator way, which is you know that you live in a place that gets hot over the summer during the day. And so you get into siesta mode.
Mm-hmm.
And we sort of, as highly developed, thinking of ourselves as superior to everyone else, look down on that because we're thinking we are way too productive for that. Nothing should ever change our routine ever, right? And realistically, when it's hot like that, especially if you know it's for a few days, right? Then the best thing is to just lay low, just do nothing, just adjust, right?
Yeah.
Don't freak out, don't whine and cry. I mean, yeah, you're uncomfortable, but just like.
So is everybody.
So not just so is everybody, but it's also is going to pass, right? I mean, you see already your 5-day forecast, and you know this is
it's 3 days, and then it's going to drop back down, and you're fine.
Yeah, exactly, right? And if you sort of say, yeah, but I was going to go on a run, yeah, I was supposed to be doing yard work or whatever, then of course you're going to be extra miserable and extra cranky because everything's going to be miserable. Everything you're doing is going to make you feel miserable, right? So you got to adopt this. And I think the other way is sort of this idea of, well, I call it the Arizona way, which is you live with air conditioning, and so you think that you can live in 100-degree weather and sort of just continue with your life. And I think people can only do it because they've learned to get up really early in the morning to do their runs or something, right?
Yes. Exactly. You start knowing, like, oh, hey, it's summer. That means very early mornings or late evenings is when I can be active.
Yeah. I think what made it extra uncomfortable here in Western Washington was the high dew point. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, we just had early in the month so much rain, and it's still early in the summer, so vegetation is still growing. So the amount of humidity that was just kind of...
nice and soupy out
there. It did feel like that, right? There've been days when we came home Monday night. So we left Saturday in the evening. Trixie was working, so we picked up from work, drove immediately down to Oregon, and then stayed Sunday, stayed Monday for as long as we could. They had to be back in Portland for work, and so we then drove up along the coast. So we came back into Olympia at like 9:30. At that time, it had considerably cooled down, and cool breeze was blowing. It was really nice. And there've been days when we went on a long run, on a long trip up in the mountains with the family, and then by the time you get home to the house, you expect it to be really hot, but it's actually cool because you kept all the windows closed, right? You weren't really moving inside, and so I kind of had the hope that would be too. Not like comfortable cool, but sort of like
cool enough where you weren't walking into an oven, right?
And it wasn't like that. It was an absolute oven in the house. It was insane. I mean, it was cool already. If we would have come home like 2 hours earlier, it probably would have been absolutely miserable, right? But because it was already cool and breezy outside, we just opened every window, every door, had every fan blowing, and it took us like 2 hours before we were, okay, I think we might be able to go to sleep tonight.
And you touched on something earlier that I think is like spot on so I was in the hottest places in like the middle of China. It was easy for us to get into the 110s during the summer for like a week or two at a time, and then drop down in the 90s, then jump back up. And everything shut down in town of 1 million people. Everything shut down from about noon to 3 or 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
That was the Shioshi time. That was when everybody took a nap. That is when it was just like, if you really need something, go out. But like you'd walk by like a shopkeeper and he'd be like sleeping under the air conditioner. And that was what the culture and custom was. And it was great because everybody understood, this is the time it gets hot.
Yeah.
Great. We're all going to shut down. And then the sun sets and then everybody went out. The whole town was out. And it was just a really nice way to deal with the heat, and you kind of learn like, oh, you can tolerate this and still make the most of it.
Yeah.
But you don't need to think like, well, this is my routine, I need to keep to it when it's hot outside and go run, a 7-mile run, and then your Strava is just like, it's so hot to run. It's like, yeah, no shit, it's above 110
Right.
degrees. Like, what were you thinking?
And you don't
You thought you could just go out there fine? Like, no.
And you don't get to go back to air conditioning, right? I think that's
Yeah.
the other thing, right? I mean, if you know that you're going to go back to your comfortable air-conditioned house or something, then perhaps you can say, oh, okay, I'll give myself 3 miles, like pretend I'm in a sauna, do some heat training,
Yeah.
get heat stroke, and then
Exactly.
I at least can get my body comfortable, right? I mean,
Yeah.
knowing that you're going to be uncomfortable the second you get out of the shower, uncomfortable while you're trying to make dinner, uncomfortable lying in bed, you're going to sleep not as well, right? It's like, you got to take care of it. Which brings me sort of to an interesting topic, which is we both are trying to train for races, and we are now entering what is sort of the interesting phase of the summer, which is finally the mountains are melting out, but it's also starting to get so busy, either with people visiting and other obligations, or the weather is getting so hot that you actually have to figure out what you can do when and where.
Yes.
And so all of a sudden your training gets interrupted, which is the weirdest thing, because during the summertime you're supposed to be able to properly train and do everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's strange.
Yeah, it is. This has been, we talked briefly about this off mic, but like June was supposed to be this very calm month. I just was like, okay, the snow's melted faster. I can get up into the mountains. I can do all these things, and I can kind of have a lazy days and a good start to a training block. And instead, I was just juggling how to train between heat and constant visitors. I had maybe one weekend in June where I didn't have some sort of obligation.
Yeah.
And as somebody who isn't that social anyway, it was very hard to do. And that's why, like, I'm just burnt out this week. Last week, I just kind of destroyed myself purposely because I knew, like, hey, I have it free. I should probably just stack up elevation as much as I can. So I did, like, nearly, like, a 40-mile week and, like, 9,000 feet a game.
Nice.
And then this week I can be like, okay, it's the hotter week.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to plan around that. It's the hotter week. Then friends came into town, and like then it's the fourth weekend, and so then it's really hard to get out because there's barbecues and all of these things now that people are vaccinated and we can get together. So like this week I'm just like, yeah, it's going to be the lowest mileage. But you need to have an easy week after, like I've been hitting hard for like 5 or 6 weeks nonstop. So I think I'm okay, but like mentally I'm like, I'm losing time, and it's hot, but I'm losing time, and people are coming, make them, and I'm like, calm down. Like
it's one of the most.
I'm in good mountain shape right now. It's great.
It's one of the most difficult things, right? I mean, I think two stories, two ways of taking this. One is, we've got adventure plans. We want to take any opportunity we can to get out and have adventures, and the realities of our family, friend obligations fly in the face of that. We need to schedule around it. The other thing is the whole training challenge, which is we set ourselves a training plan of what we need to achieve, and every weekend where we don't hammer miles or vert, every time when our training gets disrupted, we feel like we're losing. And it's one thing when we're dealing with injury, then it's we feel like we have to, but if it's other obligations, we can easily get cranky. And that's an interesting challenge. How can we schedule a training plan with the realities of life built into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
definitely.
It sort of reminds me of when I look at my Strava years, and I keep a spreadsheet just for the fun of it, where I have my monthly miles and vert, and that accumulates to a total mileage for the year, right? And I have kept it for the last 5 years or something like that, and so nothing major. But the reality is, if I look back at the the past years has always been a couple months when I'm just down in mileage, either through injury or work related, family related, whatever it may be. And we need to calculate that into our goals, right? We can't expect to be 100%. We have good months where we can easily do 250 miles and 50,000 feet of vert or whatever, right? But we can't just now take that good month, even if we feel great, and thinks we can times 12 that. There will be months where we are doing 60 miles a month, and we're like, what the hell, right?
Yeah, that's where I'm like, okay, I had a great June. I had a decent May for having a sprained ankle, but it's just so frustrating because when that ideal training is not possible due to who knows what reason, right? Then you start feeling like a failure. And I think that's super important of what you do, of just going back and looking and being like, oh yeah, this happens every year. It's a lot easier to be like, oh, my training dips here and there, or I'm not as consistent as I'd like to be. Cool, whatever. And just accept it and move on instead of putting that pressure on ourselves to do so much.
We as freelancers, we sort of need to understand that or better, right? I mean, we should be understanding this better because our business is like that, right? We go from feast to famine. We can't assume that once we get some, a month of, good invoices paid or something, we're like, yay, this is the baseline. No, the good month is the ceiling.
Yeah.
And we need to find a happy medium. This is the best it's
going to be all year. Oh, no.
Oh, no, not quite. So, yes.
Yeah, and I mean, how is your training going with everything? Are you feeling good or confident-ish?
Well, it's interesting because I think over the last year where I've done so much relaxed flat-ish in-town miles more than I've ever done before. Like I think over the last 18 months or so, if you look at that compared to all of my previous running, except perhaps during that second time when I did every single street, but I usually always skew towards low mileage and high vert. And there's probably a formula that you can come up. And over the last 18 months, I've skewed lowest than I've ever had in that formula, right? I've done less vert than I've ever done before and more mileage than I've done before. I've done it at a pace that is conducive to not injuring myself, conducive to not ever having downtime other than chafing, downtime due to like tight muscles or tendons who are pulling on whatever, right? And this last week, I've hammered pretty much out of nowhere the biggest vertical gain week outside of races all year. And I have find myself in this place where like, oh, I got to be careful because if I do this as casual, because I'm just going to Kaiser, right? And casual in terms of how I stretch afterwards, but also casual is like, oh, it's so easy to just quickly drive in and out. And then when I'm there, I'm actually running very focused. I'm not just like hiking for fun. My body starts feeling that. And I think that's good. That means I'm actually training and not just, wasting time on Strava. But I got to be careful because I think if I would do 3 more weeks of that, then I could see my legs tightening up, and I end up with, 2 weeks off because I'm injured, right?
Yeah.
And so
not a serious enough injury, but enough just that you have to like scale back so far that it's. I mean, you're still making some gains there, right? But at what cost?
Yeah, and so I gotta be careful. So I'm trying very hard. In fact, I rearranged my office to build a workout space into it just so I can do some core work, can do some stretching and stuff. So I'm trying to approach UTMR from a physical side more serious than I've approached any other race, right? And I've got a month realistically because in August, and during that month I have to um, organize LBA. So I'll be already from a timing and focus distracted. So it's going to be an interesting challenge in trying to pack that all in.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I have things that are throwing my dream training and what I feel I need to do kind of out of whack. But, at the end of the day, like, I impressed myself the last few weeks, and I'm not feeling as nervous. The main thing is mainly, like, having to pace somebody for a race.
Yeah.
Like, and understanding that I'm not doing it for me and that it's okay. Like, I want to really do the VK as fast as I can.
Mm-hmm.
The 11K, I'm just going to do it, right? It doesn't matter. It's an 11K after 2 other days racing. But that middle day with the 28, pacing somebody and having that elevation gain in the week, I'm just like, in 3 days it's going to be a bit challenging on my legs. But I did quite a lot last week and felt good, just tired but good. Like, I was like, oh man, I worked, but I got everything I wanted done. Like, I think if you can average more than 1,000 feet a day for a week or two, then I think you're good, right? Like, right. I think the training block there's a lot of time in shoes. There's a lot of different terrains being managed. There's a lot of gain. It's great. And so my goal was to do 2 big mountain days a week. And realistically, I don't know if I can do that. I can for sure get 1 a week. So for the next couple weeks, but then I'm like, in early August, I have to really take 2 weeks and hammer it hard and then taper.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm getting a little nervous with that. It's already July.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's everything's gonna fly right up and stuff. And that's definitely going to put a lot of pressure on. I mean, we can obviously rely on a general sense of fitness. And for you, the familiarity of the course and stuff.
Yeah. That's huge. Coming in with that knowledge this year of being like, okay, this is what it's going to be like. I can comfortably replicate what my days are going to look like.
Yeah.
Like, I can say, okay, this is kind of the same as the VK is going to be. Great. Let's go do that. Done. All right. But yeah, I think having a base knowledge of what to expect, and that's what I'm curious with you, is like, how is your confidence level going in as far as training correctly? Do you think you know how to train for this race, and do you think you're going to be able to get what you need to do? I know those are 2 very different questions.
I mean, realistically, I'm terrified again, right? I mean, it is. I mean, I always say I grew up in the Alps, but I mean, when was the last time I was there, right? I think, I don't know, like 2 weeks ago or so, I spent a little bit of time trying to dig into more online footage. I'm trying to understand the course and really trying to prepare myself for that. I've done it in the past with courses where I wasn't familiar with, but this one is going to be completely different, and everything's just going to be crazy different. So many things are not yet organized and planned around that, and I don't know. I don't know. I just have to do the best as I can in training, and hoping that my accumulative experience will allow me to adjust on the fly, even though I'm in completely unfamiliar terrain. Right? The nice thing for me is that I'm hoping that even though the terrain is unfamiliar, the fact that I'm in Europe in a very developed area will make it in the end easier rather than harder.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not going to be complete backcountry wilderness, because there's a layer of discomfort that I'm always experiencing when I feel like I'm in the middle of completely by myself. Wherein this hopefully will feel more familiar, because, the aid stations are going to be refugios, are going to be huts, right?
Uh-huh.
So I hope that that's going to help make the race feel more established as opposed to being in the middle of nowhere, right? I mean, when I did Zion, I wasn't afraid of scorpions or rattlesnakes, even though technically we were in a desert and they were there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was a complete unfamiliar terrain, and so it's all super, super, super challenging for sure, right? Having said this, one of the exciting things, and that was different with Lumberjack, right? I felt like doing Lumberjack, there was not a single part of the course that elated me, that elevated me emotionally, right? Where there were a couple places where sort of the mountains in the distance shone through. And it was a little bit of clear cut, but I hope that the Alps are going to carry me, because it's going to be a fucking race in the Alps that I've never done before. I've always wanted to do, and now I get to do it. That should carry me to the finish line by itself, right?
Yep. should. Yeah. You should be able to handle it. I mean, I get the logic there. Not even, you should be able to do this, but it's kind of different once you're there.
Yeah. Because, there's... The vertical gain is going to be insane. And I don't know, and that's the part that I haven't figured out. Like, Lavaredo is a tough race in the Dolomites, and I remember John Kelly racing it, and he afterwards sort of said that he wasn't really challenged by the course because he felt like there was a little bit too much just gravel road. Right? And so is the vertical gain gravel road vertical gain, so it's fairly easy running, just steep? Or is there a lot of like really hard holding on to metal ropes navigation, and that's how you get a lot of vertical gain? That's the piece that I haven't figured out, right?
Yeah.
And that it brings me to kind of a new thought process. Did you follow at all Western States this last weekend?
I did not. Okay. I won't lie. I actually unfollowed everybody tweeting about it.
I mean, it was a little bit harsh on Instagram when literally every person who's ever run had to post a picture of themselves wishing I would have Western. This was me at Western 5 years ago. I'm going through a little stream that reminds me of running Western. I'm like, blah, blah, blah.
The reason I got burnt out is exactly because of Instagram. Was people that I enjoy following, then all of a sudden they posted 70 stories. And I'm like, dude, it's why? Right. Here's another person I know. There are people that I follow that did very well this year, and I was very happy for them. And I saw their regular posts, but I just had to mute everybody's stories. I was like, this is too much for me. I get that we're happy it's back, but I have realized that my biggest issue currently with trail running is the trail running community in general. And I know that sounds like a shitty thing to say, but it's I love seeing where people go. I love seeing what they're doing. But then when it comes to races, I like hearing about races, but it's still the competitiveness or the overexcitedness of it all. And maybe it's because I haven't participated in that, but I'm just all right, I don't need to see this, so I'm just going to mute it. I don't. So no, I didn't pay attention until you sent me a link.
There we go. So let me. I'm still trying. I love, and it's an ongoing theme. And we always say we don't talk about Western States, and then we constantly talk about it by bashing it. And it's not about this, but there's an ongoing theme where we compare UTMB to Western States, and I'm trying to figure out what makes Western States special in a positive or negative way. But I think what's interesting about Western States is that, and unique, is that in the American, especially West Coast trail running world, Western States is sort of the absolute known factor that everybody participates in. I remember talking to a friend of mine years ago who was saying, if you have a good event, then everybody will say that they were at this event, even if they've never been to it. It becomes sort of this thing, right? And Western States, because it allows crews of up to 200 people per runner, or that's what it feels like, and 400 pacers for every 3 miles. I think everybody sort of gets to experience Western, and Western States is a race that basically tries to take any adventure and unknown factor out of the experience. Right? You get yourself a pacer who previously ran the race. You get yourself a volunteer crew that helps you, who understands how hot the canyons are, so they know how fast they need to get you the ice cubes in your shirt or something like that.
Yes.
Right? And so you run this race as a runner, and I'm saying that because the coverage only follows the top 10, 15 runners, right?
Yeah.
And so you sort of get this thing where you take all the unknowns out and you let the athlete perform, and you almost essentially create an Olympic game experience, right? Where it's like, how can we create an atmosphere that allows the athlete to perform at its physical peak while taking all the adventure and the discovery out, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel like most other trail races, especially for us as lay people, as amateurs, have a huge...
Do you put the lay person in lazy?
There we go. But for us as amateurs, we in general, unless we're running the same trail race in our neighborhood over and over and over and over and over again, the level of adventure is always a huge component of a trail race, right? I mean, yeah, sure, you're doing the rut, but even this time you are challenging yourself in doing something that you've never done before. You've never done it at the rut, and you've never done it, period.
Yeah.
Right? And so there is the sense of this sense of newness, of question mark, right? When I feel like the top runners go to Western and they try to take all of the and in the end, everybody gets hit by heat. That's the only thing that they always get them, even though heat is ever present at Western States. As if it's the one factor that they didn't calculate for or something. But it's sort of fascinating to me how there is an event that's created around taking sort of the adventure out of. When you compare that to the way the American coverage towards UTMB is, where the Americans go over to UTMB, and it's they don't understand the aid station food, they don't understand the language, they don't understand the noise along the course, and they don't know how to train for that, because you can't train for that over here. And so it becomes this adventure, even though UTMB is inherently more established as an event.
Yeah, right. It's literally foreign, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And for me, that's, I think, the turn off in the Western stage coverage, because for me as a layperson, I can't go to the training camp to Western States 3 weeks prior, and I can't travel down there myself to run on the race course in order to familiarize myself with the various points, right? If I would ever get into Western States, then for me it would be 100 miles of unknown territory.
Yes.
Right? And the runners, especially the ones that are very emotionally invested in Western States, for them it's this homecoming, this family reunion. They go back to the same cabin every summer with their family to do exactly the same boat ride on the same lake, drinking exactly the same beer, right? And for me, I'm unfamiliar with this. I don't get that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always there is this desire to go further, and that's kind of like why we got into the sport, is not necessarily for the repetition and the racing as much as the self-discovery, both of what we can push ourselves in and different terrains. And UTMB is not necessarily that if you're from that area, right? If you're training out there and you know the area and you've done it a couple times, it becomes more familiar. But again, the course is a little different, and it just has a different feel altogether to it than I feel that the race. And I think one's a trail run and the other's more of a race. And it's kind of like running. It's like running a 5K or running a 5K on a track. Still
It does
doing a
feel like
5K, but and that's what it's like as a layperson from the outside. Again, we haven't done Western states. I understand this, but like that is how it's positioned. Right? That's how it's documented and marketed toward us. And I think that's why I'm just like, yeah, I don't care. I don't care about the Boston Marathon either. Right? Like, I will glance at the news and be like, oh, so and so ran a good time. Like, cool. But it's with UTMB, it's more of like, oh wow, did you see like what they went through in the middle of the night, and like how it, there's there's an adventure to it.
I feel that way, that's sort of the piece that's missing with Western in the coverage, just because the runners who do well in general are the ones, especially on the
course is beautiful and amazing, right? But
sure.
like that's not what the focus becomes.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Like I could tell you very few features about that course.
Yeah, I mean, exactly.
I haven't done a lot of research either, but
right.
like it seems like something that if so many people I follow are constantly talking about it, I should know more about the course itself and the features along the way, and not just about the runners and the fast times.
Yeah, I think exactly. So anyway, so since we're already talking about Western states, the podcast that says that never talks about Western states, here's an interesting observation that I've had, and it's another Western states UTMB comparison, because apparently that's the only thing I care about, and that is, I just sent you a link before we started this show that there is there's a historical spreadsheet on the Western states website that lists the all-time best performances, the top men and the top women. Here's an interesting observation, and I'm curious if I captured this correctly. I don't even know, so I'm just like being a good white man on a podcast talking without doing a lot of research. So UTMB has been going on for a while, and I think the very first UTMB was actually won by Chrissy Mole from Bellingham. So American women have done extremely well at UTMB, while American men have never won UTMB before. The best they came in is third. Tim Tollefson, I think, Seth Swanson. There were a couple runners that have come close, but realistically, in good years, when good European runners run UTMB, no American man has had a chance. Even Walmsley, who's won Western State 3 times in a row and is breaking his own record times, has not won UTMB yet. So American women do extremely well at UTMB, and American men have never won. Now flip this to Western States. With Western States, non-American international men have won Western States, but almost all the historical record times are by American men. And I think the top record times for women at Western States are international.
You sent me this, and I was like, this is very interesting. Like, I wonder what it is. Is it the psychological impact? Is it that once races are a certain distance, we're seeing that women actually can persevere through things better than the men runners? Like, if an ultra's long enough, eventually the assumed gender placings switch.
I don't know. I think it must. Be something psychological, because it can't be that American men dominate Western States and fail at UTMB, while American women can do well at Western States, undoubtedly, but can dominate UTMB. And I mean, I don't know. But I mean, there are a couple of things. Either it's a psychological thing, or it has something to do with that women's sport is not that well funded yet internationally. But then again, Beth, Pascal, who just won Western states, I mean, one reason, aside from the fact that she's an incredible athlete, number one, she's not a full-time athlete. I think she's a nurse or something, but she's from England, and she spent 2 months here in the country preparing for Western States. She ran extensively in Arizona. She ran rim to rim to rim. So she's gotten the heat training. She's gotten the terrain training. So she specifically came over. So it can't even be a financial thing, because if somebody who's not a full-time athlete can afford to come over here. Plus, Jim Walmsley is probably one of the best paid athletes. And so he could easily afford to go over to UTMB and get paid by Hoka to do all the training that he wants to, and he somehow can't win. Is it that international man? I mean, Killian came over, and the first time he got completely killed by the heat. He finished, but he was in the lead early on, and then the Kenyans did him in, and then the next year he came back to win Western. But he had to really adjust and understand the race, and so it's fascinating. I would love to see now that we need to do an historical podcast with people who might know and have an insight into that. But that's for me an interesting question that I haven't figured out. Like Courtney Dahlwalter, never ran UTMB before, went over there and completely crushed it. She was also signed up for Western. She ran it and got injured and pulled out. And she hasn't run it since, I think. And she's undoubtedly one of the best women runners of all time, all over. And she fairly easily, I don't know if easily, but, won UTMB. But she's not won the course record, broken a course record at Western States, wherein the current course record is held by a Canadian, and Beth, who just won, got the second best time ever, and she's from the UK. I find it fascinating. Anyway, I don't know what that is, but that's...
Yeah, I'd be curious what other people think some of the reasons may be for this too, right? Like, it seems like something that when you sent me, I was like, oh, weird, this should be a larger topic. Why is this happening this way? What is the difference of training? What is the difference here if we want American runners to be more competitive at UTMB? Is it just that Western States also doesn't get a lot of the top European runners for men? But I mean, I think the American the international men runner, they all come to Western States and do it at least once, and they end up winning too. Crossward, Hane won it, I think. I want to say he won it. Killian has won it. I mean, American international runners do come over and run it, but perhaps they just come over and win it, and they don't push it trying to get a record time because winning is good enough. Because I don't know, perhaps I'm looking even at the wrong data, and it's not fair to compare, right? But it is interesting that Walmsley can dominate Western so handily. I mean, just look at this year. The reason why I even looked at this too was the fact that very few international men came over to Western this year, wherein quite a few international women came. Like at first I thought it had something to do with quarantine and difficulty of travel and stuff, right? And perhaps men just opted for a bye, because I'm sure they were signed up and now that Western offered a bypass for international runners for next year, right? But the women clearly found a way of making that work for them, and very successfully. So fast. Yeah. I don't know. It's just an interesting observation that I haven't that am ongoingly researching, and perhaps I'm gonna lay it to rest this year when American man finally has a chance to win UTMB. I mean, I think that's one of the last big hurdles that is actually possible for America. When it comes to the Soccer World Cup, America will never win. So, yeah, not gonna disagree with you there. Speaking of, how about that England team?
I know, right? No, it's good. I mean, it's good. I mean, you know what? Here's what I've red, and that makes me furious, but it doesn't surprise me. And that is, we praise Germany for a lot of things, but when it comes to organizational dysfunctionality, I think that they are pretty much on par with the US. And I think the coach, the German national team coach, he got himself into a contract that if, he would get let go early or whatever, he would get a huge buyout or some shit like that. And so they kept him on for years, even though, he was the fundamental driver of turning that German national team in 2006 into this absolute delight to watch, where Klinsmann was the coach, but he arguably was sort of the mastermind behind it. Then he took over as coach and led the same team to this absolute glorious World Cup win in Brazil in 2010. And then afterwards, a couple players retired, and he sort of had to sort of reshuffle and rebuild. And essentially since 2010, he has not been able to kind of get the team back together. And I don't know if he became too much of a scientist that he's like, ooh, I'm going to try something. And in the end, the players were like, I don't fucking understand how that works, right? But essentially, it's 100% the coach's fault, and the coach wasn't let go early. And he somehow renegotiated a contract, which with the organization, they were like, we can't let him go. So they should have gotten rid of him 8 years ago. And they didn't. And so since
now they're paying.
Yeah, for 10 years, the team has sucked, and he's not been able to properly rebuild it. And the players are great on paper. These players deserve to do much, much better. But he's completely fucked that up. So new coach is coming. And that was already announced prior to the tournament. So now the new coach can really rebuild, and he doesn't have the baggage of actually winning something.
Do you think that we are going to get to a point in trail running where there will be national teams?
Well, there is already, right?
But we'll have a coach, right? We'll have a coach that will help with training and things like that. Not individual, but there'll be one overseer of the team.
Yeah, I don't know. Is that I guess I'm trying to figure out.
It just popped in my head.
I'm trying to figure out how it is with individual sports, right? For skiing or and so I think they're individual. Swimming, right? There's a national swim team, but Michael Phelps always had its individual coach, right? I think that there's an organizer, but I think on that level, there are more individual coaches that tailor individual training plans and stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I was just wondering because will trail running get to how cross country races are, where placing matters and things like that? And if there is, then you will have a coach that could theoretically pick lineups. You know what I mean? It could get there if there is more money involved and the races become bigger.
It is an interesting story arc going back to the whole Western States UTMB, because I'm talking about US men so much, right? In some respects, trail running is an individual sport, and you're not really wearing the country's jersey, right? Walmsley runs for himself and potentially for his sponsors, right? But he's not really carrying the American flag. For America, every American always carries the American flag.
Yeah.
But you don't run as a Team US, right? And if so, you wouldn't know where to. There's no platform where Team US. I know that Maria Dalzot, who was on the podcast, she's running for the US team, right? There is some kind of US trail running association. It's just not the premier event. It's just one of those short distances, and nobody hears about it, nobody knows about it type deal. I think once you wear the jersey, you feel proud to wear it, but I don't know that it's really a thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think we're ever going to get there either, right? But it's interesting if the sport does grow. Will we see long distance races the same, become more of a team sport where people work to instead of allowing pacers, you have to have runners run the whole thing. So then you have a support crew like the Tour de France, where
Right.
everybody's working to help one person win.
Mm.
You know, setting pace here and there, but everybody has to run it. So you have your good mountain guy, right? That will pace the strong runner up the mountain at a good pace, and then they'll drop back. Things like that.
Oh yeah, the Tour de France comparison, interesting comparison. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just like to see something like that, just to see how it works out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I want to say trail running is unique, not necessarily big, but unique enough that it might find a home in the Olympics at some place. But the Olympics trail race will never be as big as UTMB or Western States.
Oh, for
right?
sure.
In the same
For sure.
way soccer is at the Olympics, and winning a gold medal in soccer is cool.
But it's not the World Cup.
But it'll never be the World Cup, right? Wherein, for us as viewers, I don't know if winning the Ski World Cup versus the Ski Olympic gold, what is bigger. For certain sports, the Olympic medal might be the highest trophy they get, as opposed to the World Cup, right? But I think for trail running, even if there would be a medal, I don't know how that would rank, right? It could be more like basketball, where, sure, a gold medal in basketball is great, but you know what's greater is a shoe contract with Nike.
Yeah. I'm just curious what the sport is going to be. It just is. It seems that there's a lot of potential, but will these races, UTMB and Western States, continue to be the world, or be the like national cup, right? Or the international cup here or there, or will something else emerge that will then be where everybody goes, and that becomes the truest test of who is the best in the sport?
Right. Well, I mean, you know, this is a really long conversation, but Spartan is doing a sort of international tournament or series, if you will. Lavaredo just joined forces with them. And Lavaredo became one of the stops in the tour. And obviously this whole Ironman UTMB announcement is sort of trying to combat that and so position itself. And they're saying they're going to have 30 races around the world, including a few races in the US. And they haven't announced any of the races in the US. And it's not going to be Western States. Western States is going to be too big to have any sort of partnership with Ironman, right?
I heard that they were looking at this race, the Little Backyard Adventure.
Yeah, that's going to be definitely right on par with UTMB. Well, the interesting thing is, I was just listening to this Tim Tollefson podcast, and I mentioned it on a previous show on with Dylan Bowman's podcast on Pillars, and he was talking about this new race that he's trying to envision, Race Festival in Mammoth Lake. And he's talking about these things. He's saying that we need a trail festival like these European festivals here in the US. And Mammoth, obviously a ski resort town, could very well be that. The same way Broken Arrow is trying to do it, Whistler, Gary Robbins is. And so they understand that they can't be in the US, they can't be in national parks and truly iconic places, so they need to be out of ski resorts. So the question is if these things emerge, even though UTMB is 100-mile by accident, if you will. I mean, I bet if that Tour de Mont Blanc, if that loop wouldn't be 161 kilometers or whatever it is, you know, to be quite honest, if the UTMB wouldn't by accident be 100 miles, it could very well be that, because Western States is 100 out of historical reasons, that perhaps the 100K distance, for example, would have established itself as being the predominant kind of crown distance. And the 100-mile would have perhaps been more one of those obscure outliers, the way, you know, those 200-mile races are, right? And so therefore, perhaps I could see that a world tour, if you will, a World Cup, perhaps is a shorter distance, right? Because the problem with 100-mile races is that an individual runner can only run a couple a year. So how do you have a tour where you gain points and in the end crown a champion? You can't have 20 races a year of a 100-mile distance. A runner couldn't handle that.
Yeah. Well, and that's where it's nice to have so many races in a race series, but like that isn't creating like a championship series, you know, to really get the best runners all competing against each other consistently. Like you're saying, it's not feasible to have 30 races. There needs to be like a 3-race World Cup.
Potentially, exactly. I mean,
where you know, your place and your points or something like that, because 30 races is great for marketing and a great source of revenue.
Yeah, it's not
it's
exactly.
Not,
it's not meant
not,
exactly. It's meant as a qualification point of view to get into UTMB, and not as a way of getting points. The way the Ski World Cup gives you points in every race, right? If you race 10 races, you get points based on your placement and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by the idea. I love the concept to follow along as a spectator and stuff, but it could not be on the 100-mile distance, right? And so because of that, because the 100-mile distance has positioned itself as sort of this crown event to follow, it's then it sort of breaks, right? Because if the 100-mile distance will always be the distance that the top runners will focus on, you know, you can then talk about the next level and saying the 100-mile distance is not really conducive to media coverage. 100K distance is better to follow, or a shorter distance, right? I mean, you could create a good media program around 100K distance. Western States is one of the fastest courses, and the top runners finish in 14 hours. And even on that, at those 14 hours, I remember following it on Saturday, and the last like 5 or 6 hours really dragged on, right? I mean, I followed on early, watched some of the coverage, read some of the tweets, and I'm like, that's really interesting. They're really tied together and stuff. And then towards the last 6 hours, I was like, last 30 miles, I was like, man, they're still on the course. They've been going out so fast. And, that's I'm not saying that the runners slow. I mean, they probably slowed down too, because the last 30 miles in the heat.
Yeah, they've already done a lot.
Right? So. But I mean, for me as a spectator, I was sort of it was hard to...
It's 14 hours to focus on anything, whether you're involved in it or not, is hard to do. And that's one of the reasons I didn't follow along with it. Is
you got better stuff to do.
I was like, I don't want to waste a day in my summer just refreshing Twitter.
No, for sure, right? And 14 hours is really only the top runner, right? I mean, realistically, you should follow more than just the top. I mean, even, I don't know what the time was for the top 20. The top 20 was 11 men, 9 women, which is also unprecedented how many women finished the top 20. But I mean, that's a good even split, right? Even if you just follow the top 20, I think you were like a good 18 hours in, right?
Yeah.
That's just...
Yeah, it's too long. It's too long for media consumption.
Oh, for sure. So if you wanted to market this, right, and you then you should definitely look at shorter distance races, right? Because I think you could keep the attention span longer, right?
Yeah.
Which, the Golden Trail series, that's what Solomon is doing. The problem is, I feel like every time I see the distances, I'm always like, well, that's short. That's not even an ultra, right?
Exactly. There isn't a perfect solution yet, and you can pick faults in everything because the sport is so wide. What is what do you consider to be an ultra?
Right.
Some people, anything under 50 miles isn't really a real long run, right? But an ultra just has to be basically a 50K, and then it's an ultra. But in the community, there's what's a real race and what isn't, and all of it. So I don't know if we're ever going to come up with a solution, which is understandable of why then we'll never have like the world championship of this, because if you could be the best 100-miler, but then you're not going to go do 50Ks, you know, and try and train differently to burn through those instead of pace yourself through a 100-miler, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a different race, it's different training.
And what would be interesting, there was another interesting comment that Tollefson and Bowman made in that podcast. They were saying we need to separate the word trail from ultra. Those are sort of two different activities. And I kind of love that idea, to saying ultras is really about long distances, and there the course can be a lot more varied, and the focus of the runner is really managing their body through this long distance. But a trail race could be easy 25K, could be easily 15K, could be easily 35K. It doesn't have to be these magic ultra numbers. So if we can split those two from each other, I think we're getting a lot closer to an answer, because we could easily come up with a certain difficulty rating in the same way ski downhill races have difficulty rating, right? They know which downhill courses are the most difficult and stuff, right? They don't get more points for doing them, but they're you know if you know. But I mean, that's, I think, what the Solomon Golden Trail series is. Those are shorter distances, and they're all focused on sort of iconic, you know, the Pikes Peak Marathon is part of it. And, but I also don't think the full marathon distance. I don't know, but Pikes Peak. Anyway, they're trying to be trail races in iconic locations, on iconic terrain, right? And I think that's something that could be easily achieved. You could come up with a 20 to 40K distance where it's worth it traveling around the world for. And then those could be definitely marketed a little better, just to get people to pay. You know, the media consumption on that will, since it is a shorter race, would be bigger. So yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, and then you can, exactly, it would be a lot easier to get good footage and sort of cut that together, right? Interesting.
Yeah. I don't know what we accomplished with that conversation, but guess what? We talked an hour about running.
No, I mean, I think, well, what we've accomplished, I mean,
I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm just saying,
it's like, true. I mean, we didn't solve anything, and, you know, if we as white men, we are definitely confident that we can solve these problems.
If we can't solve it, it's unsolvable. That's that's what it is.
That's what it is.
That's so terrible.
Oh man, you have another big topic that is.
I have another big topic. I think we'll hold off on that again, because it is like it will be an hour-long topic.
Oh.
I don't want to cram it in.
I like it.
Just because it is so big, we can do that like next week or whenever. It's gonna be an issue for a while. So, but yeah, I am definitely curious which races. Just to go back to this real quick, which races around the country are going to be built up.
Yes.
And which are going to get some serious dollars behind them. I think the secret here is look at ski resorts that have enough land to, A, put on a good race and have the elevation gain, but also that are growing and have the backing.
Right.
Of the running community and the financial powers that be.
And we've talked about this before, that the ski resorts are perfectly positioned to take advantage of this, because they're all struggling with climate change.
And a lot of them have already transitioned to doing mountain biking and stuff like that. And if you already have a mountain bike trail, then you have a trail running trail, right? Like,
no, exactly. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. That's exactly what I'm thinking.
I mean, I don't know if mountain bikers would agree, but
I totally agree with you. The trails are there. Let's go. No, absolutely. And I mean, you know, Timberline Lodges investing more and more into their mountain bike trails. So I think that's a or trails in general, they're 4-season resorts, right? That's sort of the key term here. Taking advantage of the fact that the infrastructure is already there. Why be just a winter resort during precarious and finicky climate changed times, right? Makes way more sense of attracting people all year round, which is obviously a big duh, right?
Yeah, and that's what I've been watching with Big Sky, is just how it's been growing and embracing more outdoor culture activities, not just skiing.
Yep.
This is a place that obviously I know because it's close enough and I pay attention to it, right? And I know people that work out there, but like the rut sells out in hours.
Yeah.
Right? There is a demand to run out here on these courses. And if I was somebody backing large races, I would that would be my metric. How fast a race is selling out? Because if they're selling out fast enough and there's an infrastructure there, then you can really do something special in that area. Especially if you have a mountain or you have like a scenic place like Gary Robbins races where they go through these forests and they go and like they're in incredibly scenic destinations in themselves. And this gives it a way that we always talk about, a way to have an adventure in an area that you may not go to otherwise because maybe the trails aren't well marked or not well known. But if there's course markings, then you can go and run it. Yeah. And it's great.
I mean, that's what Broken Arrow was for us, right?
Yep.
That experience. I mean, it was a unique experience. Running Broken Arrow and being in this atmosphere, big sponsored village, and having all the top runners there for the weekend and stuff. That was unique, right? I think one of the big problems that the ski resorts have is that courses aren't the courses that we as trail runners expect. Like there's very little single track, unless you consider the mountain bike trails that are potentially built up, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of, service roads and things like that. And which is, we've had that discussion before. Is that a trail or not, right?
Yeah.
If no one's really driving on it, and is it a trail just that's really wide? But yeah, we're not having as much weaving around and things like that, which is, but it is in the it's in the mountains as well, so you're not going to necessarily have the forest in the same way.
Right. Yeah, you just need to find a good way. I mean, how do you feel about now a few years later? How do you feel about Broken Arrow? Would you run that race again? I mean, in a world where races for you are something that you would regularly put on your calendar. I mean,
my biggest thing about Broken Arrow is it's a loop course.
Well, okay.
I think had that course not been 2 loops on the same course, I think it would have been more fun.
Interesting.
I think even if I DNF, at least it mentally for me, I was like, well, I'm going to go do the same thing again. Mm-hmm. Like this isn't like, who cares? I'm not going to see anything new. My draw to go further was just like, it's the same loop. I don't care.
It's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I had such a good race at Lumberjack that I'm now in love with looped courses just from a, personal management. I knew what to expect.
Through the woods and the course that you described with Lumberjack, that sounds perfect but if it's through around a ski area and it's just the same thing again, then like I would rather meander around and take all of the little roads and have only one loop.
A lot of people feel that way. Yeah, I get it.
Then repeat on a ski resort when I'm out there to get on ridgelines and get on mountains and see different things.
I hear you.
Yeah. But again, mentally, the loop courses, like knowing what I know now, like, oh, okay, I could have planned that differently. But coming in the way I was, where everything I'd done was only one big loop. There's only one. There's no overlapping on a course, and I loved that. And so then to get to something where I just have to do the same thing again, like my level of excitement dropped off.
I mean, it is definitely a challenge.
Visually, there wasn't anything else.
It's definitely a challenge. I wonder if it's not just the visual part too. It's also you're already at the finish line, right? You're already at the place where you can be done. And so therefore to get motivated to go back out and do everything yet again. Like,
Yeah.
let's say if it would be a figure eight, right? I think there would be still a
There'd
challenge,
still be,
even though
yes.
even though you are back to, you're back to you even though you have these mileage that are new, these trails that are new, you're already at the finish and at the halfway point, but it's the finish area, and to kind of pull yourself back out. It's hard. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really my only critique with something like Broken Arrow is just.
So then the question
I
would
don't
be, would you travel just for a single loop? I mean, you could do the 26K, right? But how far are you willing to travel
Right. Yeah.
for
And
a race?
I wouldn't have done the rut the first year, the 28, if I didn't already have ties and a love for the area and it was a day's drive, right? Like, I wouldn't drive all the way down to Arizona to do a 28K.
Right.
Wouldn't. I would drive down there and do a 28K on my own along with some other trails or
Right.
something like that, right? But, like, that would not be enough to get me there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would never travel to, like, San Diego and run a half marathon in San Diego. For that purpose. If I happen to be down there at the same time, sure.
Right.
You know,
yeah,
that
no,
was
absolutely.
one of many things, absolutely. But could not be the impetus of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because
so
too short, it's too short of a race.
So what's the sweet distance then at which you'd be traveling?
It's
an interesting question,
like
right?
25 plus miles.
25 plus.
Or it has to be in some sort of terrain that I wouldn't feel comfortable enough, and it would be like 17, 18 miles, and I could see that. Mm-hmm. Like, if it ran across one of the ridges in the Tetons for that distance, you know, I feel that would be unique.
Yeah.
But it would have to be something so unique that I would, in an area that I may not otherwise get to in that same way.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think a 28K is not necessarily worth all the travel, but 35K all of a sudden is. That's, you know, it's kind of, it really depends on the terrain, I think.
Right.
How about for you? Like, what's a traveling distance you would be? How far would you be willing to travel for what distance?
Well,
obviously you're going to Europe for a big race.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm very, very biased right now, but I mean, this is personal preference, so why should I be any? I'm not saying that anybody should do it, but the way I feel right now is the 100K distance is the perfect distance, and I want the 100K distance to be the perfect distance because I feel like it's doable to push yourself for 24 hours and perhaps a little bit more. Where in 100 mile, anything goes beyond 100 miles is torture, right? Because you have to go so far. It's 30 plus hours. You know, you're looking the second night into the face. You know, racing against the second night, and based on the difficulty of terrain, you actually have to deal with it, right? I mean, I did 70 miles at Zion. That was 25 and a half hours. I started at 6 in the at 6:30 or however late it was when I pulled the plug the next day, it was daylight again. And I felt like I could handle it. It was a good distance. Lumberjack was 20 hours. I felt like you can start in the morning, you can push yourself through a night, and then you can be done, right? It's not then. Yep. And now I'm going to do another full day, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like the 100K distance, number one, it's a beautiful number. And I feel like, I mean, you've not done a 50 miler yet, but I feel like if I would ask you now, I mean, look, you've done rim to rim and look how many hours you were on foot, right? I mean,
I am not opposed to that 50-mile distance.
Right, and I think the 24-hour mark you can probably reach too, right? If you get ready yourself and you say, okay, between 20 and 25 hours, how many miles in a certain terrain could you do? And you'd probably be close to 100K too, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like that time and distance feels like a good adventure that is worth traveling very far to. Like I've traveled for 50Ks, and 50K, I've traveled for 50 milers, and they just then become sort of a start in the morning and finish at night. And then you're done in the evenings and you can go to bed. That's good too, right? But I feel like if you're finishing at 9 o'clock, you can easily tag on a few more hours and push yourself through the night to get. It's only 12 more K to get to from a 50 miler to 100K, to 12 miles to get to that distance. So I think and there is something really magical about running into the night, not just like a couple hours in the mornings and at night. So I actually enjoy sort of the fighting through the night if you do it once. And so I feel like that's for me my magical distance. Having DNF'd 100-miler, I do not want to do a 100-miler right now. I feel like that's really, really long, given my slow speed, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that makes sense because, like, you know, it is a good distance, and we've talked about that before, but it's running through a full day is kind of, and then you get to stop is a perfect time frame. Like, really get to challenge yourself. You really go through some literal and physical dark times, you know, and and that's where I'm like, you know, I'm looking at my post-rut run down to Gardner from town, and it's not going to have any real gain to it. It's going to be like 2,000 feet maybe, but it's 54 miles. And I'm like, that sounds fun. It's going to take me all day. It sounds fun to do, though, and I think that's a good distance for me to achieve. And I would gladly travel to do that if there were aid stations and things like that, for sure. But, you know, I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to travel far for a 28K. Like, if I can drive there in the same day, great. But I'm not going to make vacation plans just around that.
Right,
Again, if I happen to be in an area or I'm like, hey, that's going on, and then we can go do this, great.
Right. No, exactly.
It can't be the impetus of travel just for that short distance.
Well, and I feel like
if I could run it at home and then go back to bed, I'm gonna.
Well, and the other aspect is, I think you can fairly, with the right kind of terrain and preparation and self-supported, I think you can easily do 30 miles. Right? I mean, it can't be too hot. You might need to filter with streams. You know, you need to refuel in some way. But I mean, if you look at how much time we spend on feed for Cushman 6, you know, that was we had a little water station that we had set up, and that was needed because we were in a terrain that had absolutely no refill options. And it was during wildfire season, so it was really not conducive to going solo. But I mean, I think from the amount of time, you can sort of carry enough gear with you for 30 miles. And so therefore, I don't necessarily would want to run that distance at a race, because I'm like, I can carry that on my back. I can come up with that loop.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, I can run the enchantments by myself. I don't need that distance at a race.
Yeah, and that's why that's why the 28's fine. I wouldn't have signed up for it if I wasn't going to pace somebody.
100%,
because I can run that from the house into a mountain, right?
Yes.
Like, I don't need, you know, a 17-mile day. Like, if I'm going to do a 17-mile, I'm going to push it to 20, 22 and go do something super rad, like, you know, and carry it all on my back, because I can. I don't need the aid stations for comfort for that distance. But a 50K and above, I feel like that's where. But even 30 miles, if it's not going to be crazy gain, I feel confident doing that. I can run a marathon, you know. I 30 miles isn't that much different, and I can carry everything I need on my back or find a stream and filter water for it.
Yeah, I think that's how I feel.
Yeah.
I think that seems like a good breaker. And again, right?
It's crazy though, right? I mean, look at, not to be like, oh, we're so great, because we know right off the bat we're mediocre runners, right? Like we know this, but look at how far we've come since we've been adventuring together.
Yeah.
Where like a 10-mile day was like, man, we did 10 miles. We did 12 miles. That was, I mean, could you imagine going up to Upper Royal Basin now and having, aside from the drive, of having that the full day of mountain time? Like, we would have to do Deception at this point.
No, we have to do something. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I don't really I've not really considered having gone up into that corner again, right? Because it's like,
the drive's far enough.
What's that?
I said the drive's far enough that it isn't worth the shorter miles.
Correct. No, 100%.
Since we've been there.
Right. Exactly. We're doing it once is fine.
If you have never done that trail in Olympic National Park and Forest, do it. It's amazing. But once you're looking for a really long day, that's not it.
Yeah.
Unless you tack on other things. And then you start doing what you did with the Cushman 6, of really trying to string other projects together.
Yeah. That's for me the fun challenge now, right? Is come up with routes.
I forgot to say this, but last week I went up to my favorite saddle and false summit of Mount McKnight, and am super excited to get up there in a week or so. As soon as we get back down in the 80s, I'll do this, but just go up and figure out a way to loop two of my favorite trails together, because there's not a real trail, but I've heard of a few people doing it and scrambling through mountains and everything, and I'm very excited because it's 9,000 feet for 4 or 5 miles of just picking your way through rocks and everything. I'm so excited for it, and it's and that's exactly what we're talking about. Like, that's why I'm running. That's why I'm doing all of this training throughout the year. It isn't so I can have a good race day anymore. It's so I can be in shape to do this. The races are an added bonus, because then it puts me in a place that I don't necessarily go to.
And it is terrain. You are not dealing with bushwhacking. And if it's not crazy exposed and shitty rock, then you can actually move fairly quickly, right?
Yep.
And so then it becomes an absolute joy.
Yeah, and I think that's my next week plan. I think I'll do that next week. Just now that I have one of the pictures of that ridge line as like my desktop background, and I just stare at it nonstop, and I'm like, I like those ridges. Let's go do more there.
I like it,
and it's just weird because no one else does it. But all right, that's everybody has their own preference of locations, I guess.
Yeah, that's the beauty of all of this, right?
Yep.
There are so many cool locations to do cool stuff.
Do you, as we're wrapping this up, do you have any mountain adventure training time planned still? I know last week you're thinking you'd be lucky if you get to Rose a couple of times. Is it really just going to be Kaiser and Rock Candy and all that for you?
I think I don't foresee, given the current schedule of everything, that I will go. I mean, there's still snow at Paradise, so unless you want snow travel adventure, I don't necessarily need to go to Rainier quite yet. Sunrise is not even open yet. I had a cool loop that I liked at Sunrise. If things open up, perhaps I go to Sunrise just from an elevation training point of view, altitude training, right? Just get some highest
just
point.
Put in some miles up there. Yeah, that'd be good.
But at this point, I'm planning on doing something that is as close to town as possible, just to maximize time. And so I'm probably going to visit Rose sooner than later.
Yeah. Well, there's some fires burning in BC that may be bringing smoke down soon. So
yay!
Good luck, everybody. Hooray! That, and I say that just for the West.
Right.
I hope you get to go out and, if nothing else, just get a longish day at elevation, just to get your legs and lungs acclimatized, just to understand what you'll be going through.
Correct. I know.
That's going to be the biggest shock, I think. But, who knows? You may get up there, and I think both of us have that thing of once we're in thinner air, the lack of oxygen makes us get giddy. So,
well, and my hope is that the week before I'm actually going to run a race, I'm going to be spending time in the Alps. So I'm already going to be at elevated elevation, right?
Yeah.
Perhaps,
and that's gonna pay off huge.
Yeah, I think so too.
That's what I did the first year with the rut. Is the week before, I was already, instead of at sea level, I was at 5,000, almost 6,000 feet for the whole week. So then when I'm starting at 7 or 8, it's not so bad. But coming from sea level to that would be atrocious. And it only takes a few days. If you just go on a couple long walks and run up the hotel stairs a couple times, you'll get acclimatized fast enough.
Yeah, that's the plan, to spend some time in the area, do some hikes, eat some good food on mountain huts.
Exactly. I can't wait to hear all about it. And you showed me the hotel you're staying at and the view. And we'll just let listeners wait, and they can check your social media to see that when you're there, because it's disgustingly perfect, and I love it. It's so great.
Can't wait.
Soon enough.
Soon enough.
Yeah. Well,
I
think this is a show. Do you have anything to plug? I mean, I know one thing, but
you know what? Nothing to plug. LBA.
Yeah.
Come and race LBA. And that's all I got.
Yeah. And otherwise, as I say always, if you like what you hear, share us with somebody, rate and review us online, or check out the website if you need help coming to, or don't know what to do if you're coming to Olympic, Rainier, even Glacier, Yellowstone, the Tetons, potentially North Cascades. We could probably help you plan out a trip, but I've been enjoying doing that all summer for people that have been coming out of helping them plan their trip. We have my guides; they're affordable and great. So do that. Sweet. They're on the website. Check it out. Pew, pew, pew.
One last thing, since we're already in plugging mode, and I'm actually remembering, I'm doing another orientation run July 7th. So if you want to get to know the LBA race course, come on out.
Nice.
Details.
Do it. It's fun.
Details wherever there are details to be found. I'll link it.
Especially if you've been running. Yeah. Especially if you've been running by yourself for a while. Like, come out and have a good time with other people.
There we go.
Only if you're vaxxed, though.
Seriously.